Welcome everybody to CTAC's Patient Input Consultation webinar on Simeprevir, a new direct-acting antiviral, a protease inhibitor to treat hepatitis C infection. For those of you I haven't had the chance to meet before, my name is Paul Sutton. I'm one of the policy researchers here at CTAC, the Canadian Treatment Action Council. One of the things, just before we begin, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items just to make sure that we're all prepared to participate in the webinar today. The first thing is, if you haven't already done so, and I don't think I hear any feedback, so this is a good sign, but if you haven't already done so, what I'm going to ask you to do is to press *6 to mute your line, and that'll be able to ensure that we can move pretty smoothly through the first part of the webinar. So once we've done that, the other thing that I'd like everybody to test out right now is you're going to see up at the top of the screen, there's a little guy with his hand up, a little icon. And what I would like each of you to do is to press on the little drop-down button and press the Raise Hand button. So if you all could do that now, I see that we've got some folks who are doing this. This is great. Thank you for doing our little test. And then what I'd now like you to do is press the lower hand button to remove that icon from each beside you. So if you go back up to that guy again and press lower hand, that's going to clear everything. Good. Thank you. This function will be important because this is the function that we will use later in the webinar in order to be able to facilitate a discussion and questions about the content of the presentation. It's the easiest tool that we have to facilitate a discussion over teleconference, which can sometimes be a little bit unwieldy. So first and foremost, thank you everybody for coming and for coming to participate in this webinar today. We hope that it will be informative and that it will also represent an opportunity for each of you to be able to participate in the crucial patient input process around any new drug that is being thought to be put on the market in Canada, and specifically at this really important time with a lot of technological advance in the treatment of hepatitis C. So that's what we'll be focusing on today. As many of you know, and for those of you who don't, CTAC, the Canadian Treatment Action Council, is Canada's national civil society organization addressing access to treatment, care, and support for people living with HIV and hepatitis C, starting primarily as an HIV organization and then focusing on hepatitis C issues through a co-infection mandate, an HIV hepatitis C co-infection mandate that started in 2006. And as major treatment access issues relating to hepatitis C and new drug development has come to the fore, we have integrated hepatitis C more substantially into our work. So CTAC, the way that we do our work is that we meaningfully engage community members, service providers, and policymakers and researchers to identify and implement program and policy solutions, which is the role that we're playing today, a part of what we call our Consultation to Action framework to ensure that our policy positions are really reflecting the lived realities of people living with hepatitis C and HIV across Canada. So this is what we have on the docket today, our agenda. What I propose to do, and I'm going to speak for what's going to be about 40 to 45 minutes, and over that 40 to 45 minutes, what I'm going to do is provide a bit of a background on the Common Drug Review and market access for new medications in Canada, what it's all about, why we're here today, and what the specific thing that we're trying to accomplish today, what kind of consequences it will have in terms of accelerating access and ensuring access to Simeprevir, this new protease inhibitor to treat hepatitis C. Then what I'm going to do to provide some background is talk about the current available standard for hepatitis C treatment, and in that get into a bit of a discussion about what we are currently able to accomplish in the field of hepatitis C treatment and what some important clinical improvements might represent. And then from there, what I want to do is talk about four specific clinical improvements that the introduction of Simeprevir into hepatitis C treatment has the potential to do. From there, we'll talk about very briefly about the future of hepatitis C treatment, as well as the future that might hold for Simeprevir as a part of future drug regimens to treat hepatitis C. So that's our goals for today. And what I'm going to do then is launch right in. So again, to reiterate, I'll speak for about 40 minutes on each of these materials, not each of these materials, 40 minutes in total on these materials, and then we'll have an opportunity for discussion and questions. If you have a question throughout my presentation, feel free to press that raise hand button, and between slides, I'll ask you to unmute your line, and then we can have that question or clarification point addressed. But we can also be assured that there will be plenty of opportunity for questions towards the end of the presentation. Okay. So the first thing that I'd like to do is talk about the Common Drug Review and market access, really the biggest reason why we're here today. And why I want to talk about the Common Drug Review is to be able to provide some familiarity so that we're all starting from the same position about how new medications come to market in Canada. And what happens in Canada is that there's a three-step process. The first step is drug approval that happens by Health Canada, so regulatory approval, which has to do with safety and efficacy of new medications. Then in all provinces and public drug plans, except for Quebec, new medications are then submitted to the Common Drug Review, which is a product of CTAC, the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health. And they look at the Health Canada data as well as the safety and efficacy data again, and also make an assessment as to a new medication's cost effectiveness for inclusion in public plans. And because, of course, as we know, most people who access, not all, but most people who access hepatitis C treatment in Canada access it through a public assistance plan to defray the substantial cost of hepatitis C treatment. This is particularly important in the world of hepatitis C and access to treatment in Canada. So it's the second piece that we're going to be informing today by talking about Simeprevir and the Common Drug Review. And then from the Common Drug Review, as I said, the Common Drug Review decisions are then sent to all of the public formularies in Canada, with the exception of Quebec, which has its own assessment system. This slide here represents, it's a complicated slide to represent how drug development by industry as well as regulatory work by Health Canada works on, or leads to the development, approval, and dissemination of medications in Canada. And what you'll see that around this sort of circle here on the screen is a series of green dots. And this is just a way of reflecting the role that CTAC plays in informing market access in Canada. So one of the things that we do all the way throughout is do our very best to reflect the needs, the treatment needs of people living with HIV and hepatitis C, and to be engaging with industry and developers throughout this process in order to reflect the needs of patients. And then when a new medication does come to market, what you'll see is as we move around this little circle here, there's a point called drug submission, where not so much at the Health Canada point, which is the difference between the Health Canada and the Common Drug Review, is something that I'll explain on the next slide. But at this particular point in time, CTAC takes a role to ensure that the meaningful inclusion of people living with HIV and hepatitis C has place in the patient input process. And this is really what we're doing today. From here, as we move a little bit around the circle, then we play a role in advocacy for inclusion of new medications on public formularies following decisions by the Common Drug Review and by INES, the Health Technology Assessment in Quebec. We do ongoing information dissemination and knowledge translation work, not just around treatments, but about access issues more generally. And then really importantly, and this links up to the sort of the 10 o'clock part on the circle and the 12 o'clock part on the circle, information dissemination and opportunity for feedback with folks who are undergoing hepatitis C treatment or folks who are on HIV treatment across the country is something we can then reflect back to industry partners who are looking at being able to improve drug regimens for people living with hepatitis C HCV and HIV, and I think that this is really important today as we're talking about hepatitis C, where a number of new medications are about to come to the fore, and Simeprevir represents one of them, and one of them that we've been able to determine has some promising uses for people who are interested in treating their hepatitis C. There are, referring before, there are 19 public formularies in Canada that list and provide access to people who are accessing these formularies for medications. And so there's a public formulary for each province and territory, as well as 6 nationally administered formularies: the Canadian Forces Health Services Program, the Correctional Services of Canada Program, the Interim Federal Health Program, non-insured health benefits, which are health benefits for Status First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in Canada, the Public Service Health Program, and Special Access Program. And it's important for us at CTAC that when a new medication that has the possibility of being clinically important and presenting clinical improvement, that all of these medications be determined to be cost-effective and included on each of these formularies in order to improve health outcomes for people living with hepatitis C and HIV. So just briefly, because I kind of skipped over it a little bit, Health Canada plays an initial role in, so this is step 1, Health Canada plays an initial role in the process of a new medication coming to market in Canada by assessing whether it's safe and whether it's effective in treating the condition that it's submitted to treat. And so they then, if there's a favorable decision made by Health Canada gives a new medication a notice of compliance. And that notice of compliance says, yes, this new medication is safe, it's effective, and it's now okay for the person or company who owns the medication to market it, or which is another word for sell it, in Canada. So that's the first step, and I'm going to say, because Simeprevir is actually playing around a little bit with this process, but that's the first and initial, that's the gateway opening step for access to new medications in Canada. And then what we're talking about today is the criteria by which the Common Drug Review, which then adds to the safety and efficacy question, the question of cost effectiveness, how the Common Drug Review then makes its decisions in order to recommend that public drug plans fund new medications. So the Common Drug Review looks at questions of safety, looks at questions of efficacy, looks then at cost effectiveness. So, and that really has to do with what clinical need or what clinical improvement that's provided by a new drug, how does the cost of the new drug weigh against the kind of improvements that are made? And that's a really quick definition of cost effectiveness. I'm going to talk about a brief case study before we launch into the Simeprevir information today, but that's a really quick definition of cost effectiveness that we can talk about more in the discussion period if you wish. The important thing, and again, why we're here today, is that the Common Drug Review has its 4th criteria as patient input. And so one of the things that CTAC does, one of our central roles is to steward the patient input of people living with hepatitis C or people who provide care for people living with hepatitis C when a new hepatitis C drug comes to market in Canada. And that's why we're providing this information and providing each of you an opportunity to give feedback today. How does the Common Drug Review work? So I was talking about this NOC, this Notice of Compliance that's provided by Health Canada. The Common Drug Review invites the producers or the pharmaceutical companies that have made a new medication prior to the Notice of Compliance being offered by Health Canada to submit their clinical trial data to the Common Drug Review. And the Common Drug Review has a choice. If a new medication is for an immediately life-threatening or other serious disease or illness, as hepatitis C is, and if a new medication will significantly reduce drug plan expenditures, the Common Drug Review can elect to grant priority review for a new medication. And again, one of the reasons why we're here today is that Simeprevir has not yet been granted a Notice of Compliance for hepatitis C, to treat hepatitis C. However, Simeprevir has been granted priority review by the Common Drug Review. And so the clinical trial data that's been presented with the Common Drug Review is being taken very seriously. And what this has the potential to do is to reduce the number of delays that might be taking place between Health Canada making a decision about Simeprevir and the Common Drug Review making a decision about Simeprevir. When this happens, not always, but it does suggest that the decisions that lead to the eventual availability of a new medication like Simeprevir will happen a little bit quicker than, say, in other cases. When the Common Drug Review makes its decisions, or its recommendations rather, about once it assesses the safety, efficacy, patient input, and cost effectiveness data about Simeprevir, it has 4 choices about the kind of recommendation it can list. The first recommendation that it can make, although it's rare that the Common Drug Review makes this recommendation, is that public plans list the drug. It's saying this new medication is safe, it's effective, and it's going to reduce your drug plan expenses over the short, medium, and longer term. So list it right away. Start providing it. It's a great medication that's also going to be able to help balance the books. More often, what happens in the hepatitis C and HIV fields is this second recommendation: list with criteria. What this recommendation means is that it's going to the CDR is going to recommend that public plans list a medication to be available under certain clinical as well as cost recommendations. And so I'm going to talk about Simeprevir, one of the current direct-acting antivirals that's available to treat hepatitis C, in just a minute, which received the list of criteria, which the Common Drug Review suggested that the Simeprevir, for example, be made available for people with more advanced liver fibrosis and not less advanced liver fibrosis, so that public plans, not all decided to take this up, but that the public plans consider only making it available for people with a fibrosis score of F2 or higher. We'll talk about that in a little bit. One of the ones that might make sense for a lot of people on the call is to recommend the drug, saying that it's safe and effective and important, but to not list at the current price, and then requires the manufacturer to go back and resubmit a new price, or rather hints to public plans to negotiate, to require a different price than what was submitted to the Common Drug Review. And then the fourth, which has not happened very often in HIV, certainly has not, to my knowledge, happened ever in hepatitis C since the Common Drug Review came into existence in 2003, but is a do not list, which is saying the medication may be safe and effective, but it's certainly not cost effective, and it actually may not be effective in comparison to currently available medications. These are the options that the Common Drug Review has. And to illustrate this, I just want to very quickly address a case study on Simeprevir, one of the 2 direct-acting antivirals that's currently available. And so this says list with conditions. It really should say list with criteria. That was the recommendation from the Common Drug Review. And we can see what these recommendations look like, the recommendations that they made to public plans. Recommendation to reduce the price, to recommend that Simeprevir only be used with, sorry, I've spelled detectable wrong there, for it to only be used with patients with detectable hepatitis C, RNA, and fibrosis, which makes sense, and fibrosis from F2 to F4, which I think a number of us on the webinar today would propose some caution that we only provide hepatitis C treatment with people who are already experiencing more advanced fibrosis. So that's an important question. It recommends 1 12-week course of treatment only for people who for people who are undergoing hepatitis C treatment, which again has some issues. It certainly limits the availability of a person to be able to go on treatment again while this is the current medication. And also, we'll talk about this a little bit more because this is really important, does not recommend the use of Simeprevir with people who are co-infected with HIV. And as many of us know, that for people who are living with HIV and with hepatitis C co-infection, that the possibility is, and the probability for a lot of folks, is that people are experiencing accelerated and significant health consequences associated with their hepatitis C progression and may need new treatments very, very quickly. And one of the consequences, actually, of Simeprevir being recommended by the Common Drug Review for a period of time and Common Drug Review's changed its course on this, but only in June, so only a couple of months ago. But the recommendation led only Alberta to not directly contraindicate the use of Simeprevir with HIV-positive people. And then Ontario didn't list Simeprevir for use with anybody living with hepatitis C, except, and I should have updated the slide, except for people who are previous null responders. So this gives an idea of what some of the consequences of the listing that's now going to be considered for Simeprevir are, or for Simeprevir are, and why a good, strong patient input form and an input submission is important in this process. Okay, so I have one. I have one hand up from Mitra. So Mitra, if to ask your question or make your comment, I'm going to ask you to press #6. That'll unmute your line, and then to press *6 when we're done.
Okay. The June 14th review of the CDR guidelines actually removed the restriction for use in co-infected. So it doesn't necessarily say go ahead and use it in co-infected patients, but it's actually removed that line that said not to be used in co-infected.
Exactly. So thank you for providing a bit of clarification on that piece. That's important. And also important means that just when the Common Drug Review removes a line, it also means that folks like me and CTAC more broadly, and really all of us interested in increasing access to hepatitis C treatment, that we then have a role to ensure and to ask public plans in provinces, territories, and the federal plans to respond to that information and just to accelerate that process. So it is important, and that plans then make their decisions. Thank you. Okay. What I'm going to talk about now is the current standard of hepatitis C treatment. This is to get everybody on the same page of what's currently available. I'm sure that most people on the call are familiar with this. But what I'm going to talk about is the current standard of treatment that's available for people living with hep C. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what the use of the current treatments in real-life settings has told us about some of the clinical limitations of the current treatments that we have available. So really briefly, the current standard of care for hepatitis C treatment is a 48-week treatment with ribavirin, pegylated with daily doses of ribavirin, with weekly injections of pegylated interferon, and then the use of Simeprevir or Simeprevir, both direct-acting antivirals, to really bolster this treatment. As you'll see through my note here, that Simeprevir is administered for only 12 weeks of the treatment after a 4-week lead-in period, while ribavirin and pegylated interferon is taken for a whole 48-week period. So people are actually only on Simeprevir, one of these medications, for 12 weeks. That's not the case with Simeprevir treatment, where people are taking Simeprevir over the course of their 48-week treatment. So that's the current standard of care. And we'll notice a couple of things about this current standard of care. One is that it's quite long. There's new clinical trials that are showing that conditions under which a response-guided therapy to Simeprevir, which I'll talk about what response-guided therapy looks like and how that plays out in clinical environments happens in just a minute, but that a response-guided therapy for some folks taking Simeprevir with some measures might be possible, and that we might be able to cut this in half to a 24-week treatment. But currently, the current treatment regimen that we're asking people to undertake during hepatitis C treatment is quite arduous and lasts for nearly a year. And that leads us to some considerations around challenges associated with the current standard of care for hepatitis C. And for those who are living, or those on the call or the webinar rather, who have been living with hepatitis C, who have undergone hepatitis C treatment before, or anybody who provides care or services to people who are living with hepatitis C and undergoing treatment, none of these should be any kind of a surprise. As I said, the length of treatment, a 48-week, a nearly full year treatment for hepatitis C is very hard to endure. And one of the biggest reasons why it's hard to endure is because hepatitis C treatment is currently associated with very substantial serious adverse events, another word for side effects. The biggest adverse event producer in hepatitis C treatment, as I'm sure all of us are aware, is pegylated interferon, the weekly injections that remain to this point, and not as a spoiler alert, but will at this particular point in time remain as a backbone of a proposed Simeprevir treatment, are incredibly difficult to endure. Constant flu-like symptoms for a year, fatigue, anemia, just to name the most major of the symptoms. So that's something that is a really significant piece to contend with. Another important side as well is for those of you who, for people who are co-infected with HIV, is that pegylated interferon is also not particularly well acting in people who are living with HIV, and so it really reduces the ability for hepatitis C treatments to be effective in people who are living with HIV and hepatitis C co-infection. And so one of the things that we want to see, I'll talk about this at the end of the presentation, is a hepatitis C treatment that that doesn't include pegylated interferon. This is kind of the holy grail for the next step of development. I have one hand up from Ron. So Ron, if you'd like to press #6 and ask your question, that would be great.
Hi there. Just on the list of adverse side effects, one of the ones that you may have mentioned, Paul, if I missed it, I'm sorry, but I don't think I heard it, and that's the possibility of severe depression. And I think it's worth mentioning because when we're looking for options and going to do a patient submission, it'd be interesting to hear from folks on, whether that's a factor for them. Thanks.
Thank you, Ron, for pointing that out. It was definitely an oversight on my part to not include the really substantial mental health consequences. So in addition to feeling fatigued and flu-like symptoms for a year, we know, and it's very well documented, that pegylated interferon exacerbates the brain chemical reactions that lead to a series of major mental health events. And so people who are on hepatitis C treatment are also oftentimes being treated for substantial mental health issues, ranging from antidepressants to antipsychotics, which again makes pegylated interferon backbone therapy incredibly difficult to endure. So one of the other things that happens when, and it was really challenging, I think, for all of us to witness this happening, but one of the things that happened when Simeprevir and Simeprevir became available in 2011 for treatment, it was a moment of tremendous treatment optimism, that finally here was here were new medications that were going to dramatically increase positive treatment outcomes. And it's true, the use of Simeprevir and Simeprevir have dramatically increased positive treatment outcomes in terms of a SVR, or a sustained virological response, a functional hepatitis C cure, which is the primary goal for hepatitis C treatment, so that people can clear their hepatitis C. But one of the things that came along with Simeprevir and Simeprevir were new or increased adverse events. And the big one for Simeprevir is anemia, really increased anemia beyond what has been witnessed in pegylated interferon treatment alone, that has had the consequences and the really expensive for the health system consequences of increasing the number of blood transfusions that are required for people who are undergoing hepatitis C treatment. A really important piece to keep in mind around how we think we're going to structure the whole health response, or the whole health system response to hepatitis C treatment. And then, as many folks are aware, Simeprevir, quite unfortunately, produced a really substantial rash, and that in some cases led to fatalities, which then led to a black box warning by the FDA about the rash for Simeprevir provision. One of the other challenges of the current standard of care is pill burden. And with Simeprevir and Simeprevir treatment, with dosing either 2 or 3 times a day with anywhere between 3 and 5 pills that have that have food intake requirements as well, and not insubstantial food intake requirements, but the requirement of a meal with 150 milligrams of fat has really not made taking these triple therapies that's currently offered very easy for people to do, and that's again a concern. This slide that I'm sharing here is also of a particular concern, and so one of the things that we know about clinical trials is that they often work, despite the sort of diversity of people who get included in clinical trials, they work to show how a medication works under the very best of circumstances in order to ensure that the new medication can be registered and gets approved as safe and effective to be used in order to treat a condition and to improve treatment outcomes. And I don't think that anybody is really opposed to that, but this particular study that I'm highlighting here, which comes out of France, the CTAC study, shows some of the concerns that we need to have when we're thinking about hepatitis C treatment in real life settings. So the numbers that I share in the statement above, which come from the ADVANCE and SPRINT 2 trials that were the registrational trials for Simeprevir and Boceprevir, showed really fantastic results, 79% SVR rates for Simeprevir, 66% SVR rates for Boceprevir with treatment-naive patients, that when the folks who are being treated for hepatitis C with Simeprevir and Boceprevir included therapies in the CTAC cohort in France, this was a group of people who were prior relapsers, people with more advanced fibrosis and cirrhosis, so F3 and F4 Metvir scores, shows that actually in these real life settings, the numbers may not actually be so rosy. So in these and granted, they are harder to treat populations, and this is something that we know. But 79% and 66% rates are not reflected here. And in fact, we see a 40% SVR rate amongst these harder to treat populations with Simeprevir and 41% rates amongst harder to treat populations with Boceprevir. And so one of the take-home messages here is that one of the things that we're looking for in new hepatitis C treatments that are going to become available is hepatitis C treatments that show that they're effective with people who are living with hepatitis C who are harder to treat, or who have had, or who have relapsed after treatment, or have not responded to hepatitis C treatment in the past when having taken it. So this is our list. This is a list of things that we need to do in order to optimize hepatitis C treatment. Obviously, we need to be able to increase successful treatment outcomes in terms of sustained virological response, or SVR, the functional cure for hepatitis C. This is obviously the main outcome. But here are some other things that I think are important and that many of us who work on hepatitis C treatment issues know are important in new treatments for hepatitis C. We need to shorten the duration of treatment. 48 weeks is too long, even with less side effects. 48 weeks is too long to ask people to go on treatment. It's not an ideal situation whatsoever for people who are looking to treat their hepatitis C and to be able to move on with their lives. This is not a patient-centric treatment regimen. Even if it is effective, if we can shorten it, this is a key goal. We obviously need hepatitis C treatments that minimize adverse events. So we don't want to see new hepatitis C treatments that add on increased anemia or rash that can prove to be fatal, or at the very least making staying on treatment very, very challenging. We need to lower the pill burden associated with hepatitis C treatment. And then, what I was talking about and what Ron was referring to a little bit earlier there, what we really need to is an interferon-free treatment that will then lead to a hepatitis C cure. And so what I want to talk about in the next part of the presentation is the 4 things on this list that Simeprevir-based treatments have the potential to realize. So, Simeprevir, what we know from clinical trials. I want to talk very briefly about the data sources and the research. Oh, and there's one, before we move into this, there's one hand up from Ron. So Ron, press #6 and let us know your question or comment.
Paul,
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you are making a distinction between sustained virological response, SVR, and a hepatitis C cure. They're both, bulleted at the start and the bottom of your list, and I'm not sure if there's a distinction.
So I think thank you for this clarification piece, Ron. I'm not distinguishing between a hepatitis C cure and this sort of increased successful treatment outcomes list. Maybe it's best to think of this list as a kind of progression from things that I want us to be able to see now and that we can accomplish now, and what I'd sort of like to see in the future. So one of the things that I think that we can see now and can see from the treatment advances that are being made is increases in cure rates, the functional cure rates for hepatitis C. When I talk about a hepatitis C cure at the bottom, I think that is the primary goal for all of us, is to, and hopefully by 2019, 2020, 2021, to be able to see a regimen that's going to work for everybody living with hepatitis C, where we can functionally cure hepatitis C for everybody who's living with it once and for all. And so
by which you mean achieving a sustained virological response?
Yes.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to move into what we know about Simeprevir from the clinical trials. And just I want to give everybody, just so that there's full disclosure about where I have obtained this data. I'm going to share data from the phase 3 trials for Simeprevir, and specifically the Quest 1, Quest 2, and Promise trials. Quest 1 and Quest 2 being 2 trials that were undertaken with treatment-naive patients, with people who hadn't taken hepatitis C treatment before. And I also am going to share some really interesting results from the Promise trials, which are with people who have previously relapsed after hepatitis C treatment. This will be shared, and I'll share the slide deck to anybody who's interested. This is sometimes, especially if you don't get to go to every conference, which I don't, I wish I did, but I don't, it can be difficult to obtain all the slides. However, Jules Levin and his group at natap.org always do an exceptional job in ensuring that slides are available. So there's some fantastic slides presented from the European Association for the Study of the Liver, the EASL meeting from May 2013 that reports on Quest 1 and Quest 2. This is where I'm getting most of this data. And the Promise results were reported from the Digestive Disease Week meeting in May 2013 in Orlando. I don't have the slides for that meeting, and here I'm reporting on, or I'm relying on a report from HIVandhepatitis.com written by Liz Heileman that's reporting these results. So that's just that's my clarity moment around where this information is coming from. Okay. What I want to talk about first is the possibility of shortening treatment with Simeprevir. Simeprevir employed the following trial protocol that's represented here. And what Simeprevir was able to do in the studies with treatment-naive folks, as well as studies with treatment-experienced folks, which I'll talk about in a minute, was able to set up a response-guided therapy. And so this is how it worked. Over the first 12 weeks of treatment, the experimental arm, people who received Simeprevir plus ribavirin plus pegylated interferon, they had the amount that they were studied to find how much hepatitis C viral RNA rates were still in their bloodstream at week 4 and week 12 of treatment. And people who had undetectable HCV in their bloodstream at week 4 and week 12 were given a response-guided therapy option where treatment was stopped at week 24. So, in effect, cutting the treatment length in half. Those folks who had response-guided therapy were then given post-treatment follow-up until the 48-week mark, as well as the 72-week mark. People who were not able to meet those undetectable HCV thresholds were still given ribavirin and pegylated interferon for the duration of 48 weeks, as was the case in the placebo arm. And the placebo arm, importantly, was ribavirin and pegylated interferon. And this is an important piece to point out, is that the comparisons that are happening here are not between a triple therapy of ribavirin, pegylated interferon, and Simeprevir or Simeprevir. The standard of care that's being measured against here is ribavirin and pegylated interferon plus Simeprevir versus ribavirin and pegylated interferon alone. It's important to keep in mind because the numbers that we're looking at would be different. So this is how the response-guided therapy experiment turned out with Simeprevir, and it was actually really, really good. A large number of patients in clinical trials were eligible for, actually the vast majority of patients in clinical trials were eligible for response-guided therapy and shortened their treatment to 24 weeks. This was very big. For the treatment-naive folks in the trials, 85 to 91% of patients qualified and only had a 24-week treatment for with Simeprevir or with a Simeprevir-based regimen for their hepatitis C. One of the really interesting things to point out here that's very encouraging is people who had previously relapsed. Of people who had previously relapsed after hepatitis C treatment, 93%, even more people were able to qualify for shortened treatment. And so the take-home message from this particular slide is that shortening treatment for 24 weeks doesn't seem to be something that's available just for people who are treatment naive alone, that this is something that is eligible for people across the hepatitis C patient population. And one of the things that we also saw, so it wasn't just that we had shorter therapy, the shorter therapy also led to increased rates of SVR, the sustained virological response, the functional cure for hepatitis C. So in this slide shows the results from the treatment-naive studies, Quest 1 and Quest 2. And so in Quest 1, 80% of people who took the Simeprevir included regimen achieved sustained virological response, and or achieved rather sustained SVR12, the primary endpoint, so the measure of undetectable hepatitis C RNA at week 12 of the therapy, which then led them into the response-guided therapy arm, 81% in Quest 2, representing an increase, a 30 or 31% increase over standard therapy, the pegylated interferon and ribavirin. So encouraging increase in rates. Although, of course, similar rates seen amongst the treatment-naive studies for Simeprevir, for example. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, right? We're not seeing a substantial increase amongst naives of SVR rates. It's just an important thing to keep in mind so that we're all really clear about what the data is saying. This is the data, and this is so an important thing to point out here is that this data comes from the phase 2 study, not the phase 3. So this is the only phase 2 data that I've included here. Comes from the phase 2, not the phase 3 study of people who previously relapsed after taking hepatitis C treatment. I don't have access to that chart yet, actually. It's one of the, if it was a couple of weeks down the road, I would have been able to share this. This said, I'm confident in sharing this information because it demonstrates from what was reported in HIVandHepatitis.com anyway, it's consistent with what was measured in the phase 3 trials. And so I'm going to draw everybody's attention specifically to the green bars on the graph. And why I'm drawing your attention to that instead of the blue bars on the graph is that Simeprevir included regimens, or which their former name was TMC 435. Simeprevir included regimens that were used in phase 3 trials were with 150 milligram pill of Simeprevir and not 100 milligram pill of Simeprevir. This was an attempt to figure out what's the best dosing. And this was conducted in the phase 2 trials. So the numbers that are going to be reflected and relevant to us is the 150 milligram pill in phase 3, or that was used in phase 3 trials. And what we see from this phase 2 data is that 85% of people who had previously relapsed after treatment, after a ribavirin and pegylated interferon treatment, 85%, really, really, really high, achieved SVR at week 24. 75% of partial responders and 51% of null responders. And so what we're really seeing, especially in comparison to the placebo groups of pegylated interferon and ribavirin alone, is that we're getting there. We're moving up the ability to get sustained virological response rates in people who have relapsed after treatment or didn't respond to treatment at all. So this is good news for thinking about bringing Simeprevir onto the market and making it accessible for folks. So that is about SVR rates. And what I want to then talk to is sort of the other side of SVR rates, which is adverse events. And one of the major improvements, I think, as we all know, is that we can improve by lessening the incidence of adverse events in hepatitis C treatment. And this is, the slide is not very clear, and I will again send this in PDF to everybody who registered for this webinar today. But this represents, and the story on this slide is that there's not a significant increase in adverse events associated with Simeprevir therapy in comparison to ribavirin and pegylated interferon, the placebo. Okay, the numbers are effectively the same. One of the increases that we've seen in terms of adverse events is increased bilirubin in people who are taking Simeprevir-based therapies. The scientific reason for that is Simeprevir inhibits some of the genes that work through bilirubin, so that's something that's going to happen, but nothing to a point that was clinically significant for concern. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So what we're looking at, and again, we might not, it might look different, right, once we've seen Simeprevir used in real-world cases. I'm totally going to sort of bracket this, but at this particular point in time, we don't see a substantial increase in an adverse event profile based on the use of Simeprevir alone. What we see actually here, as well as in Quest 2, is that the adverse events that people are experiencing mostly have to do with the pegylated interferon that continues to need to be used in this therapy. So that's actually a good news story. It's not a good news story that we're still at a pegylated interferon age. That's something that we're still going to have to wait 1 to 2 years to see what happens next. But what we're seeing is a new intervention that has the potential to dramatically increase SVR for a wide variety of people living with hepatitis C, with a wide variety of scores, and that this is helping. So I've got a hand up from Ron. Ron, press #6 and let us know your question or comment.
I notice that on the previous slide, looking at anemia, in Quest 1, there was a little more anemia in the Simeprevir group versus the placebo group.
Yes.
Whereas in Quest 2, there seemed to be more anemia in the placebo group.
Yes.
I don't, Paul, I don't expect you to have the answer, but it is curious. And it may, it may impact what people want to say regarding, the patient's admission. Do you have any idea why there is that interesting difference?
I have no idea why there was an interesting difference, other than reading, and again, one of the reasons why I will share out this piece is that there's references at the bottom of both of these slides, but the investigators in their presentations did not identify the anemia and the difference in anemia rates either between the population, between the groups, the control group and the experimental group in either of the studies as clinically significant. Now, there wasn't interpretation why there was a difference and if it was clinically significant between the two studies. That's not an answer that I have, but it's an important, very important detail point to point out there, Ron. So thank you. And I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer.
No, I wasn't expecting you to. I mean, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next slide now. And this is our summary point. The one thing that I didn't have a specific slide for because it's a short piece is Simeprevir treatment would be a once daily pill as opposed to multiple pills multiple times a day, as is seen in the currently available treatment. So this is the reason for check mark number 4. So it would be a 150 milligram pill. It does require to be taken with food, but not with the fat restrictions that are seen, for example, in Simeprevir. So here's your summary point of the overall benefits that we can see with including Simeprevir as a clinical advance in hepatitis C treatment. It has the potential to increase successful treatment outcomes. We see a substantial increase in treatment outcomes in terms of sustained virological response. At the same time, it does something that we've been wanting for quite a while. It shortens treatment by half for the vast majority of people who undertake Simeprevir treatment, which is a good news story. It minimizes adverse events. Unfortunately, we're still using pegylated interferon, which creates the vast majority of the adverse events that we see when anybody undertakes hepatitis C treatment. Luckily, for most people, a Simeprevir backbone treatment is only going to be 24 weeks in duration, so that is some help in this. But the adverse events are not specifically seen with Simeprevir. In fact, they're consistent with a pegylated interferon therapy anyway, and we reduce the pill burden. We haven't gotten to interferon-free treatment, but I'm going to talk about that in just a second. We haven't gotten to that hepatitis C cure point for everybody, but I think that we're on our way. This is a bit of a busy slide, and I was not even, because it comes from Mans and others' presentation at EASL 2013, but I just want to give everybody a bit of a context about Simeprevir and its potential future uses. Now, here's the caveat. The patient submission that we're making and that we're asking each of you to contribute to is not for an interferon-based regimen. We're asking people to evaluate your take as patients and caregivers and people who are interested in HIV or in hepatitis C rather. We're asking you to consider the usefulness and the improvement offered by Simeprevir when it's being used with ribavirin and pegylated interferon. But one of the reasons why I'm interested in talking more with people about Simeprevir is that it has some potential uses as a part of an eventual interferon-free regimen. So these orange pieces that you see at the top represent trials that are either now complete in terms of Quest 1, Quest 2, and Promise, complete or ongoing, assessing Simeprevir with triple therapy with pegylated interferon and ribavirin. And what you'll see also, and I can talk about this a little bit in the discussion period, although I don't have firm answers, that this is also that the study is ongoing, not yet complete, but ongoing, of what of Simeprevir backbone treatment for people who are living with HIV and hepatitis C co-infection. What we can see, though, is that there's the beginning of a treatment with Simeprevir and Sofosbuvir, a Gilead medication that it seems, in terms of the timeline on this, as they've submitted to the FDA, and we're under the impression that they've submitted to Health Canada as well, that we may be doing this sort of thing again in the next few months to talk about Sofosbuvir and get your input on Sofosbuvir, that a Simeprevir plus Sofosbuvir with or without ribavirin regimen may be one of the first potential interferon-free regimens that we might see. We also see, if you move down, the second from the bottom is Simeprevir being used with Decladisvir, which is a Bristol-Myers Squibb drug under development, with or without ribavirin. It's being tested in people who are treatment naive as well as previous null responders to see if that may work as an interferon-free treatment. The last one is Simeprevir plus a new Vertex drug under development, with or without ribavirin for treatment naive, that are happening here as well. And so this is all to say, and to give everybody a little bit of an idea of what's coming in terms of hepatitis C treatment, is quite a bit. Hundreds of compounds potentially being able to come together to provide a treatment that will clear hepatitis C for everybody. That's why I really pointed out that hepatitis C cure as something that we really need to be looking forward to. It will require a tremendous amount of hard work and courage in terms of pharmaceutical development, and it will also require all of us to come together to be able to support clinicians as well as people living with hepatitis C who are interested in treating their hepatitis C, that we all come together and support the ability for the right pharmaceutical interventions to be able to be made available through the public plans in Canada, which is really why we're here today. So what I want to do is actually leave it on this slide. I'm going to talk about what the patient input process could look like, or the ways in which we're asking you guys to give us some feedback and some help in this. But what I want to do now is open this up for questions and for comments and for discussion. So for those of you who have scrolled a question or a comment away, please feel free now to use the raise hand button on the call. Now, Ron, I've noticed that you have your hand still raised. Oh no, you've let it down. So I would just like to ask people now then, if you have questions or comment or something that you'd like to say, to raise your hand, and then I'll call on each of you individually. Okay, so I have one hand up from John. So John, if you could press #6 and let us know your question or your comment. And John, just to let you know, we can't hear you yet, so you may have to press #6 again.
There we go. Okay, somebody had to go first. I imagine there might be other opportunities for input here. I just wanted to let the people know on the call, and I don't know, if there's more practitioners on the call or who else is joining us. But I was part of, I believe, the phase 2 trials for Simeprevir here in Toronto, and I was successfully treated on a 24-week treatment period. I was, I guess, in your lingo, treatment naive. I had never been treated before. It was a virus I had contracted, probably in the 1970s, diagnosed in 2009. So I did the ribavirin pegylated interferon, and it appears I was in the experimental group of the double-blinded trial because I was cleared after 24 weeks. At 12 weeks, just again for anyone who has not been through the treatment, at 12 weeks I went on antidepressants. Just to deal with those types of side effects. That was quite effective, and I had good care. And by 24 weeks, I was desperately pleased to no longer be taking the interferon. Best I can tell, obviously it's difficult to say, they really watched for rash. I had none of the any rash side effects, and my side effects appeared to be typical as to what somebody might get on the standard treatment alone. So if there's any other questions from somebody who's been through it, I'm happy to answer them, but that's really just my comment.
And thank you, John, so much for sharing your experience with the treatment. It's oftentimes a challenge, actually, for us to be able to, just because of the way that double-blinded studies take place, it's hard for us to locate people who we know have had experience with Simeprevir treatment, and it does make a patient submission much stronger when the experience of somebody who's actually been there gets to be included. So really appreciate you being here today and sharing that information with everybody on the call. Does anybody else have any questions or comments that you'd like to share at this time? Okay, so seeing none, what I'm going to do is move on. Oh, I have one here. So Christian, press #6 and let us know your question or comment. And just for the record, Christian, we can't hear you yet. So you may have to press pound 6 again. Christian? Okay, unfortunately, I don't think that we were able to get Christian's line through. Christian, if you press pound 6 again, we might be able to hear you. Fortunately, we weren't able to hear Christian, so I'm just going to advance to the next slide. Sorry about that. Okay. I want to talk really briefly before I sort of get into what CTAC does in terms of providing patient input. I actually want to give a shout out. A colleague of mine from Hep C BC is on the webinar today, and Hep C BC is also making a patient submission in support of Simeprevir to the Common Drug Review. They have posted on their website, which I believe is hepcbc.ca, and if I'm wrong, I hope that my colleague who's on the webinar will forgive me. They are also seeking input and have included a little bit of a survey on their website to provide an opportunity for feedback. One of the things that I'm going to do for everybody who is registered in the call today and who's attended is I'll provide a link to where that is on their website. So once you've completed our survey, it would be a really great favor to all of us and to Hep C BC for you to be able to provide input to them as well for those of you who are interested. So that's just a little bit of a heads up and FYI. For those of you who haven't participated, and we've done this sort of new way of collecting patient input once before, we at CTAC have developed a web-based survey for people to be able to feed into and answer some of the questions that are included in the patient input form that's provided to us by the Common Drug Review. And what I want to do is just cover the high-level points of what is included in the Common Drug Review request for input form, which we've tailored to a more user-friendly survey, or what I hope you'll find to be a more user-friendly survey when you access it. So what's being asked of you is to, whether you're a person living with hepatitis C, or whether you're a person who provides services or care to somebody living with hepatitis C or who has had experience with hepatitis C, the questions are around what's the impact of hepatitis C, untreated hepatitis C or hepatitis C in everyday life? What is the impact of current hepatitis C treatment from what you've seen or what you've experienced? What adverse events or side effects are tolerable and which aren't, which is, of course, a really key piece in hepatitis C care and hepatitis C work. What's the impact that hepatitis C and hepatitis C treatment, current treatment, has on caregivers or service providers? And for those of you, and I know there are a couple on the call, so thank you very much for joining us. For those of you who have taken Simeprevir, how is your treatment better than the current standard therapy in your view and your experience with adverse events? So those components are what's asked in our patient input survey. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through two concluding slides, and if you do have a last minute question or comment, now would be the time to press the raise hand button. What I'm going to do is, and I have one comment or question from Mark. So Mark, could you press pound 6 and let us know?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Just a question around, is there an opportunity to share these questions with people who are in our community here, for example, for me here in Calgary, to share this questionnaire and comments and seek input from people who are hepatitis C positive?
Absolutely.
Who may not have actually taken this treatment or may have taken this treatment to be part of this process?
Absolutely. So here's one of the things that's going to happen. there's a pro and a con about this, about the common drug review submission. The pro is that we get to make them. The con is that they are undertaken with a 20 business day turnaround from the point at which they're announced. And one of the things that happened, just so happened in this particular case, was that the call for patient input for Simeprevir happened a lot sooner than anybody was anticipating. So even in the best of circumstances, actually, there's not a lot of period of time to be able to get patient input. But this said, the link that I'm going to share in the webinar room here, as well as this slide deck, is something that I'm going to share to all of you who attended and are registered or were registered for this session today. You'll get the link to the survey as well as this slide deck that we're happy for you to distribute out to anybody who you think would be interested in and willing to provide feedback. Here's the kicker. The kicker is we have to close data collection for this patient input survey on Tuesday the 4th, that is this coming Tuesday, the one after Labor Day, at the end of the business day at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, which doesn't give a lot of time. So for those of you who would be interested, and we would be very, very grateful for you passing this information out and this feedback opportunity out to people. One of the things to keep in mind is that it does need to be completed in short order. The other sort of mitigating factor, and I hope as many of you as possible are attending, is that we're holding a national conference on September the 16th and September the 17th. And so this is one of the things that internally we need to have finished a little bit more quickly, and that's compressed the timeline as well. Mark, you have a follow-up question, so if you press #6. Oh, Mark, we don't have you yet?
Oh, sorry, I have you on my own personal mute line as well.
Okay.
So we'll get this link today then, Paul?
You're going to get it in about 20 minutes after the session is finished.
You rock. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other questions about the patient input process here? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to move us toward our conclusion. I try to include resources at the end of every presentation, and if you were to ask me what are the resources that I go to most often in terms of staying up on the hepatitis C as well as the HIV pipeline, to be totally honest, the first one and the bottom one are really the ones that I spend a lot of time on. Importantly, the Treatment Action Group in New York, that partners with iBase, has just released their 2013 pipeline report at pipelinereport.org with a really, really, really fantastic introductory essay called 7 Ways to Speed Up the Pipeline, which might be of interest to people. The pipeline report is a really, really, really great way to read in as plain of language as possible when you're talking about the pipeline, what's coming in hepatitis C as well as HIV and TB treatment is an important thing to point out. A lot of the data that I was talking about was presented at the European Association for the Study of the Liver conference in May 2013 this year at EASL. This link, again, I'm going to email you this slide deck, so don't feel that you need to scribble everything down right away. But there's a really fantastic summary at that web link there of everything that was shared at that meeting about the future of hepatitis C treatment. As well as HIVandhepatitis.com is always a fantastic place to go to read news coverage of the major conference events. One other resource that I want to share here too is 2 Standards of Care Toward Treatment Equity for People Living with HIV and Hepatitis C Co-infection, which is a position paper that we just published here at CTAC, which analyzed the clinical trial design for current hepatitis C treatments and the ways in which those have delayed the process by which data about the effects of new hep C treatments in people living with HIV as well, and the effect that those delays have on delaying access on public drug plans through the Common Drug Review, of what that looks like, and some concrete recommendations to change that scheme. So for those of you who have interest, this report is now available on our website, which is ctac.ca, and I encourage you to download it, check it out, and always feel free to contact me with any questions, comments, concerns that you may have what the role of this information, what the role of hepatitis C access issues may be in your own communities, as well as any questions about any reports that we have in this area. I'm always available to you. So with this, what I'm going to do is open up, you're going to see, hold on just a second. In the middle of the screen is a link for the CTAC patient input feedback form for Simeprevir. So for those of you who are particularly keen, you can click on the text that says CTAC patient input feedback form for Simeprevir, and then click on the Browse To button, and that's immediately going to take you to our survey data collection tool right now. I'm also, as I said in response to Mark's question, I will send out a follow-up email in the next 20 minutes with the slide deck and with this link, as well as a link to the Hep C BC website with their survey collection tool as well, so that you can provide your assistance to Hep C BC too as they work on this process. With that, I thank everybody for participating in this webinar today and for taking time out of your schedules and for bolstering CTAC and really our whole response's ability to provide crucial patient input around market access questions for new hepatitis C treatments. We look forward to having you on future webinars, and thanks again.